A new kind of global struggle is forming, quiet enough to slip past the front page, but powerful enough to reshape the world's balance of influence. It is not loud like a missile test or dramatic like a tariff announcement. Instead, it moves underneath the speeches, political theater, and public debates. The world is drifting into a contest where the most decisive weapon is not semiconductors, naval fleets, or economic sanctions. It is crude oil, a resource that many assumed would slowly fade as renewable energy grew, yet somehow remains the bloodstream of modern civilization. Oil fuels military engines, fills commercial shipping lanes, powers industries, and secures national strategies. Whoever shapes the flow of oil shapes the rhythm of global power. Welcome to Political Plot, where we cut through the noise to reveal the power plays shaping American politics. Today, we are unpacking an energy conflict unfolding beneath the usual headlines. The United States is fighting to protect the petrodollar system that underpins its global influence, while China is quietly building its own energy architecture designed to function even if America's financial reach collapses. This is not simply a disagreement between two nations. It is a silent contest between a long-standing superpower defending its position and a rising challenger designing a new international order. Under Donald Trump, Washington shifted toward a direct and confrontational energy doctrine. The idea behind this approach was simple: secure oil at the source, extend American military and political weight over the countries producing it, and tighten control of the global supply routes that carry it. If the United States could dominate the extraction of oil and dominate the choke points that move it, then it could dominate outcomes far beyond oil itself and maintain leadership over global strategy. China followed a completely different path. Instead of competing for wells, Beijing invested in long-term resilience. It purchased astonishing volumes of crude during economic slowdowns and funneled them into massive storage facilities. Underground caverns, coastal tank farms, and private depots across the country began filling with oil at a scale the world had never seen. China's logic was that energy independence, even for a limited number of months, would make the nation resistant to crises, blockades, or price manipulation. One superpower is trying to put its hand on the global tap. The other is trying to survive and thrive even if the tap is temporarily cut off. That difference defines the energy battlefield of this century. To understand how Washington is applying its strategy, look at Venezuela. The country sits on the largest proven oil reserves in the world. Its crude is incredibly cheap to extract, significantly cheaper than American shale oil, which gives Venezuela resilience during price crashes. When Hugo Chavez nationalized the oil industry and redirected revenue inward, Venezuela became dependent on petroleum for survival. When prices collapsed and the pandemic crushed global demand, the country's economy fell apart. Washington acted swiftly. Heavy sanctions were imposed to block Venezuela from selling its oil. Companies were restricted from providing equipment, international banks froze assets, and foreign investors backed away. United States naval forces positioned themselves near Venezuelan waters as a quiet reminder of American presence. The official justification framed these actions as a fight for democracy, but anyone watching closely understood that the target was control of the world's richest oil basin. Weakening Venezuela strengthened Washington's grip. After South America, attention shifted toward Africa's energy giant Nigeria. Nigerian crude is light, sweet, and globally valued, but what concerned Washington was not the oil itself. It was Nigeria's growing relationship with China. Beijing invested billions into Nigerian railways, ports, and infrastructure as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. A major oil producer moving deeper into China's orbit would weaken American leverage across the African continent. Soon, Washington accused Nigeria of significant human rights violations. These claims may or may not have strong evidence behind them, but they created a moral pretext for diplomatic and political pressure. This pattern is well established. When a country shifts toward Beijing, American narratives focusing on morality or human rights often follow. The purpose is not necessarily intervention. The purpose is influence. You can trace similar patterns across the globe. Iran has been under crushing sanctions for decades. Iraq still operates under the shadow of American military involvement long after the initial conflict. Even Canada, a close ally, becomes part of the strategic energy conversation whenever pipeline routes or Arctic resources enter the discussion. Washington's approach is consistent. If oil plays a role, the United States will use economic pressure, diplomacy, military presence, and information campaigns to maintain dominance. China, however, is not fighting the same fight. While Washington pushes outward, China is securing inward stability. When its domestic consumption slowed, China began purchasing massive quantities of crude at discounted prices. Satellite images showed tankers lined up at ports, unloading millions of barrels into newly built storage systems. China's goal is to build strategic reserves strong enough to keep the country running through a long disruption. This reserve is more than a security blanket. It is a tool that can influence the global oil market. As the world's largest importer, China can cause dramatic price swings simply by pausing or resuming purchases. China also buys from countries targeted by American sanctions. This includes Iran, Russia, and Venezuela. These purchases benefit China economically because they come with steep discounts. But the political message behind each tanker is even more important. China is telling the world that American sanctions cannot control its energy decisions. As more nations begin trading with China outside the reach of the American financial system, the influence of the United States slowly erodes. At the heart of this conflict lies the petrodollar system. For decades, nearly all global oil transactions have been priced and settled in US dollars. This forced countries to hold dollars as reserves, making the dollar indispensable. It allowed Washington to run enormous deficits, maintain global military power, and use the financial system as a strategic tool. The petrodollar is not just an economic structure, it is a pillar of American geopolitical supremacy. Trump's pressure campaigns in Venezuela, Nigeria, and the Middle East were not isolated events. They were attempts to defend the petrodollar from being weakened by China's expanding influence. But China is approaching the problem from an entirely different direction. Instead of competing within the petrodollar system, Beijing is building a separate pathway that does not rely on the US dollar. China has encouraged oil producers to accept yuan, rubles, or gold-backed settlement methods. The Shanghai Crude Exchange provides producers with a platform to sell oil for yuan that can be converted to gold. Countries under American pressure, such as Russia and Iran, have already begun using these alternatives. Even Saudi Arabia has signaled openness to settling some oil trades in Chinese currency. Each step away from the dollar reduces America's long-standing advantage. This conflict is fundamentally not about which nation has the largest reserves or the most wells. It is about who controls the system surrounding oil. This includes the financial networks, shipping routes, storage facilities, maritime insurance systems, currency settlement platforms, and digital logistics tracking. America controls through pressure and projection. China controls through endurance, alliances, and alternatives. Every time Washington tightens sanctions, targeted nations drift closer to Beijing, where they are offered new lifelines. Every time China expands its alternative trade networks, the petrodollar loses a small piece of its global footprint. One nation is fighting to preserve the old order, the other is quietly constructing the next one. The most powerful nation in the future may not be the one with the most oil or the strongest military. It may be the one that designs the next global energy architecture. The true weapon in this new era is not the barrel itself, but the invisible system wrapped around it, and the nation that successfully shapes that system will define the world's future structure of power.